The trauma bay doors slammed open hard enough to shake the glass panels. A police officer stumbled inside first, blood soaking through one sleeve, shouting for lockdown. Behind him, two paramedics pushed a gurney carrying a handcuffed prisoner with a gunshot wound buried high in his chest. The man was still conscious, still smiling. Nobody noticed the quiet trauma nurse standing at the back wall. Elias Ward kept his gloves on, eyes lowered, chart pressed against his chest while doctors argued over jurisdiction. Armed officers filled the hallway, and frightened patients were rushed deeper into the hospital. Then the power flickered, once, twice. The prisoner on the gurney looked directly at Elias and smiled wider. Outside, somewhere beyond the rain and rooftop floodlights, the sound of helicopter rotors began cutting through the night. Inside the ER, nobody understood why the silent nurse suddenly started counting exits. But before the night was over, a Black Hawk crew would land on the hospital roof asking one question no one there could answer. Where is the Ranger medic? Rain hammered the ambulance bay hard enough to blur the floodlights outside St. Mercy Regional Hospital into pale streaks of white. Inside the emergency department, the night shift moved with the slow exhaustion of people already running behind. Phones rang without pause. Stretchers rolled across old tile floors. A child cried somewhere near triage while a resident argued with radiology over delayed scans. Near Trauma Room 3, Elias Ward cleaned dried blood from a stainless steel instrument tray with steady hands. Nobody spoke to him unless they needed something. Ward, one of the residents called without looking up from a tablet. Trauma intake forms. Elias handed them over immediately, no delay. No expression, the resident barely acknowledged him before walking away. A younger nurse named Claire leaned closer to another coworker near the medication station. Her voice stayed low, but not low enough. Does he ever talk? The other nurse shrugged. Maybe twice a shift. He's strange. Elias continued wiping the tray. Not faster, not slower. The conversation passed over him like distant weather. At 42, Elias looked older than most trauma nurses on staff. His shoulders were broad beneath faded blue scrubs, his hair trimmed short enough to look almost military, though nobody in the hospital thought much about that. Plenty of men kept short hair. Plenty of exhausted nurses kept to themselves. What stood out was his stillness, even during chaos. Elias never seemed rushed, never seemed surprised. Near midnight, an intoxicated patient exploded into shouting near triage after learning his brother had been transferred to county jail. Security moved toward the man immediately, but Elias reached the scene first. He did not threaten. Did not raise his voice. He simply stepped between the man and the nurse's station at an angle that blocked the hallway without appearing aggressive. Sit down, Elias said calmly. The patient kept shouting. Elias watched his hands instead of his face. Watched his breathing. Watched the unstable shifting in his stance. You're bleeding through your bandage, Elias said quietly. If you keep moving, it opens again. The man hesitated. That hesitation was enough. Security arrived seconds later and guided the patient away without incident. One of the guards shook his head afterward. You should have worked corrections instead of nursing. Elias returned to the trauma bay without answering. The guard frowned after him. That guy creeps me out, he muttered. Inside Trauma Room 3, Elias replaced supplies with mechanical precision. Gauze first, airway kits second, IV lines checked twice. His movements were economical, practiced, almost ritualistic. Most people never noticed how carefully he positioned equipment. But Elias always kept critical tools within immediate reach, always. Knew where exits were, always noticed what could become dangerous. Outside, thunder rolled low across the city. The storm was getting worse. The automatic doors near admissions opened again, letting in cold wind and the distant sound of police sirens somewhere beyond downtown. Elias glanced toward the entrance. Only once. Then he returned to work. At the central desk, two residents watched local news clips on a muted phone screen. Police lights flashed across the tiny display. Third armed robbery this week, one of them said. Whole city's turning into a war zone. Supposedly 2 officers got shot tonight. Seriously? Yeah, north side. Claire looked over toward Elias while organizing medication trays. He probably likes hearing that. The resident smirked. Why? I don't know, she whispered. He just looks like somebody who's seen weird things. Elias walked past them carrying fresh saline bags. Neither resident stopped talking. You ever ask him about himself? He doesn't answer. Maybe witness protection. That earned a laugh. Elias continued down the hallway without reacting, but as he turned the corner, his eyes lifted briefly toward a dark security camera mounted above the emergency exit. He slowed only slightly. The camera flickered once, static, then normal again. Most people would never notice. Elias did. He studied it for another second before. Continuing on, at 12:17 a.m., the power dimmed for less than half a heartbeat. Computers blinked, monitors reset. Several staff members groaned in frustration. Perfect, one doctor muttered. Exactly what we need tonight. Elias stopped moving, entirely listening, not to the machines, to the silence underneath them. The generator failed to kick immediately, only 1 second late, but late enough. His eyes shifted toward the E. Ambulance entrance again, darkness flashing. Distant lights. Then came the sound. Faint. At first, not thunder rotor blades, far away, Elias lowered the box of supplies in his hands. Across the ER, nobody else seemed to notice. A patient complained about wait times. Someone laughed near radiology. Phones continued ringing endlessly, beneath fluorescent lights. The normal sounds of a hospital at night, but Elias's expression changed almost invisibly. Not fear, recognition. He walked calmly toward the trauma. Desk, Claire, he said. She looked up, surprised he'd spoken first. Move the pediatric overflow patients away from the east corridor. She blinked. Why? Just do it. Something in his tone made her pause. Not authority, not anger, certainty. Before she could ask another question, the ambulance bay doors burst open. Cold rain swept into the hallway, and 2 police officers rushed inside beside a blood-covered stretcher. The automatic doors struggled to close against the wind as the stretcher was pushed inside. Rainwater mixed with blood on the linoleum floor. 2 paramedics moved fast, but carefully, like they already knew this patient could not afford a single mistake. A police officer followed them in, one arm clamped tightly against his side where a makeshift bandage was already soaked through. Gunshot wound, the officer said sharply. Suspect in custody. We need OR prep and lockdown protocols now. Behind him, more officers entered the ER, not casually, positioned, watching the exits. Elias stood near trauma room 3 as the stretcher passed him. The patient on it was still conscious. That was the first problem. Mid-30s, broad shoulders, dark hair plastered to his forehead, handcuffed wrists secured to the rail of the gurney. 1 bullet wound high in the chest, controlled bleeding but not stabilized enough to explain the calm in his expression. He was smiling slightly, not in pain, not in panic, just watching. His eyes tracked the ceiling lights as he was rolled deeper into the trauma bay, then briefly shifted toward Elias, held a second too long, then moved on. Elias did not react outwardly, but his focus sharpened. Name? A nurse asked quickly. Doesn't matter, one officer replied. He's a lieutenant in the Serrano crew. Multiple armed robberies. 3 officers down tonight because of him. The word crew changed the temperature in the room. Everyone understood what that meant. Retaliation risk, external pressure, time. Limit, the ER manager appeared at the edge of the hallway, already overwhelmed. We need clearance for OR1, and I want security doubled. It's already being handled, a second officer interrupted. Not reassuring. Controlled. Too controlled. Elias watched the prisoner. Again, as they transferred him onto the trauma bed, the man winced briefly as the gurney locks. Released, then relaxed again, almost relieved. That detail mattered. Most gunshot victims behaved differently. Fear, shock, confusion, not patience. Elias stepped closer to the monitors. Pressure dropping, one resident said. Chest tube ready? Not yet. We need imaging. Do it now, the officer snapped. The resident hesitated. The prisoner spoke for the first time. His voice was calm, almost conversational. You're wasting time. No one responded, But Elias did something subtle. He shifted his position, not closer, not further. Just angled so he could see both the patient and the hallway behind him, Claire. "Noticed, Ward," she whispered. "What are you doing?" "Nothing," he said, but his eyes were not on the wound. They were on the officers near the door. 3 of them now, one pretending to watch the patient. 2 watching everything else. Elias's gaze moved to their boots, then to their radios, then to their hands. They were not relaxed. They were waiting. Outside, thunder rolled again, closer this time, a low vibration through the building. Somewhere in the ER. A monitor beeped sharply, then another. The prisoner turned his head slightly toward Elias again. This time, he spoke quieter. "You should leave early tonight." Elias did not answer. The resident working the airway looked confused. "What did he say?" "Nothing," Elias replied immediately. 2. "Quickly!" The resident frowned but returned to work. A nurse tightened restraints. The prisoner did not resist, still smiling faintly. "Get him to CT," the trauma lead ordered. "Negative," one officer said. "He stays here until federal transfer." That sentence changed the room. Again, federal transfer. Not standard. Procedure, not routine arrest, something layered. Underneath, Elias noticed the ER cameras above the trauma bay flicker again, shorter. This time, half a second. Then stable. But the feed on. The central monitor glitched just once. Claire followed his gaze. "You seeing that?" she asked. Elias did not answer. Instead, he quietly adjusted a supply cart near the door, not blocking it, positioning it like a marker, like a reference point. The prisoner tilted his head slightly toward him, still cuffed, still bleeding, still smiling. "You're not one of them," he said, softly. Elias finally looked at him directly. No emotion, no reaction. Just assessment. The officer nearby stepped closer. "What did he say?" "Nothing," Elias replied. But the prisoner's eyes stayed locked on him, like recognition, like confirmation. Outside the ER, the sound of rotor blades grew louder, no longer distant. Now, present above the hospital roof, the lights inside the trauma bay flickered. Again. Once. Twice. And every officer in the room went still, not because of the lights, because of the radios. All of them had just gone quiet. For 3 seconds, the ER felt like it had lost its pulse. Then the radios crackled back to life. Not normally, not cleanly. Fragments of overlapping transmissions spilled into the corridor. Static, clipped commands, and something closer to urgency than procedure. Repeat. Perimeter units confirm movement on west access. No visual on rooftop doors. Stand by. We have unidentified comm interference. One of the officers near Trauma Room 2 lifted his radio again. Nothing came through, only static. Claire glanced toward the ceiling speakers. "Is that normal?" "No," Elias said. The word was quiet, final. He didn't elaborate. He didn't need to. Across the trauma bay, the prisoner shifted slightly against the restraints. Not struggling, testing, measuring. His eyes drifted toward the ceiling like he was listening to something no one else could hear. The resident leaned over the chart. "CT is still available, but security won't allow. Transport without clearance." "Then get clearance," the trauma lead snapped. "Federal override is in progress," one officer replied. That sentence should have stabilized things. It didn't. Instead, it made everything more rigid, too structured, too prepared. Elias moved toward the supply station without urgency. He checked gauze counts, reordered kits that didn't need reordering, replaced gloves already stocked. Claire followed him halfway down the hall. "You're acting weird," she said quietly. "I'm acting normal," Elias replied. "No," she insisted. "You're repositioning things." He paused just long enough for her to notice. Then continued. "You're placing equipment, like you're planning movement paths." Elias stopped. The silence between them stretched, not uncomfortable, just heavy. "You should move the pediatric overflow patients away from East Corridor," he said again. "That's not my job." "It will be," he replied. That was all. "No, Explanation, Claire frowned, watching him walk away. Then she hesitated and finally turned toward the nurse's station. At 12:41 a.m., the hospital's security cameras began, failing in sequence, not all at once, not dramatics, one corridor at a time. East wing, service hallway, loading dock. Then, the trauma bay feed froze for exactly 2 seconds before returning with slight delay, the IT technician muttered from behind a monitor. We're getting packet loss. Could be storm interference, but Elias was watching something else. The timing, the pattern, the spacing. He stepped into the hallway near trauma room. 3, counted silently. 3 seconds, pause, 2 seconds, pause, 4 seconds. He exhaled once, not relief. Confirmation. The prisoner's voice came again from behind him. You've seen this before. Elias didn't turn. You don't know me, Elias said. A faint sound of amusement came from the gurney. I know the way you stand, the prisoner replied. You don't belong here, an officer leaned in sharply. Shut him up. No, Elias said. The officer looked at him. Excuse me? Don't restrain his speech, Elias added calmly. It won't change what's already in motion. That sentence landed wrong. In the room, not dramatic, not loud, but precise enough to unsettle people who didn't understand why. The trauma lead glanced at Elias. What does that mean? Elias didn't answer. Instead, he walked to the supply cart and checked the bottom drawer, then the wall-mounted fire map, then the emergency exit beyond the trauma bay. He wasn't looking at one thing. He was mapping. Relationships, distances, time. Claire came back, slightly out of breath. East corridor is clear. I moved the overflow like you said. Good, Elias replied. Why does it matter? He didn't answer immediately. Then, because that's the closest uncontrolled access point from the roof. Claire froze. Roof? Before she could ask anything else, a loud metallic thump echoed somewhere above them. Not thunder. Not construction, a deliberate impact. The overhead lights flickered again. Once, longer this time. The prisoner smiled wider. And then the hospital intercom system. Crackled! Security alert! A distorted voice announced. All non-essential personnel remain in secured zones. Pause. Static. Then again, security alert. The voice cut off mid-sentence. Every monitor in the trauma bay simultaneously blinked and died for half a second. When they came back, the waveform on the central vitals monitor had changed. Not medically, not accidentally, all at once. One officer swore under his breath. What the hell is that? Elias stared at the monitor, then spoke quietly. They're inside the system already. The room went still. Even the prisoner stopped smiling for a moment. Outside the trauma wing, somewhere deep in the hospital, a distant door alarm began to sound. Then another, then another. Elias finally looked toward the ceiling. Not up. Through it, like he could already see what was coming. And for the first time that night, he adjusted his gloves. The first gunshot did not echo inside the hospital. It was absorbed, smothered by concrete, distance, and the hum of emergency systems struggling to stay online. But everyone felt it anyway. A vibration through the floor near the east service corridor, then shouting, then a second sound, sharper, closer, metal striking metal as a security gate was forced open from the outside. Lock it down. Someone yelled from the hallway. Immediately after, the ER doors were sealed electronically. Too late. The system hesitated before responding, a half-second delay that no one should have noticed, but Elias did. The prisoner in trauma room. 3 laughed once under his breath. Not loud, not directed at anyone, just recognition. That's not police protocol, one of the officers said, already moving toward the hallway. It is now, another replied, pulling his weapon. The trauma lead froze. You're saying we have an active breach inside the hospital? No, Elias said quietly. All eyes turned to him. He didn't raise his voice, didn't move from his position near the supply cart. He simply continued watching the hallway. Beyond the trauma bay, we have coordinated entry, he said. Claire stared at him. Coordinated by who? Elias didn't answer immediately because the answer wasn't important yet. What mattered was timing. The second gunshot came from the west. Corridor. Closer. Then a scream cut off abruptly. Over the intercom before it could complete a name, lights dimmed again. This time, they did not stabilize immediately. Emergency. Red lighting engaged in sections of the hospital only. Not all. Only parts. Selective. Failure. That detail mattered more than panic. The prisoner shifted, slightly on the trauma bed. Still restrained. Still bleeding. Still calm. You should have moved earlier, he said. Quietly, Elias finally looked at him. No, Elias replied. I should have confirmed first. A pause. Then the prisoner nodded once, like that answer made sense. Outside the trauma room, security rushed past in formation. Not scattered, not confused, but reacting too late to something already organized. Elias moved. Not fast, not visibly urgent, but deliberate. He pulled a trauma cart closer to the door, adjusted its angle, blocked line of sight. From the hallway without obstructing exit, Claire noticed immediately. What are you doing? Creating space, Elias said. For what? For movement. That answer didn't help her. Inside the hallway, gunfire erupted again, closer this time, short bursts, controlled spacing, not chaotic, not random. One of the officers in the trauma bay spoke into his radio, voice tight. We need backup in ER East Corridor, now. Static answered him, nothing else. He looked up. Radio's dead. Elias exhaled once. Not dead, he said. Overridden, the officer stared at him. What does that mean? Elias didn't respond, because the system was no longer the priority. The breach was advancing, step by step, corridor by corridor, not rushing, clearing. The prisoner tilted his head slightly. They came for me faster than expected. No, Elias said softly. They didn't come for you. That made the room colder. Even the trauma lead paused. Then what are they here for? Elias looked toward the ceiling again, as if measuring distance through. Floors, containment, he said. A beat of silence. Then, another explosion of gunfire, this time closer to the trauma wing entrance. The Kyo. Doors at the far end of the corridor slammed. Open footsteps, multiple controlled. 42 figures appeared at the edge of the hallway, dressed in dark tactical gear without insignia visible. From the trauma bay, they didn't rush in. They assessed first. One of them raised a hand signal, then stopped, because they saw Elias. That moment changed the tempo, not because Elias moved, but because they recognized something in how he stood. One of the officers, near the door, instinctively stepped back. Federal? Someone whispered. No one answered. The tactical team entered slowly. Weapons lowered slightly, not aimed, but ready. The lead operator spoke into a shoulder mic. Visual confirmed. Hospital interior secure route compromised. Then he looked directly at Elias and said one sentence that made the entire trauma room go still. We're here for the ranger. Medic, silence. Not confusion, not disbelief. Stillness. Claire turned slowly toward Elias. The trauma. Lee did the same. Even the prisoner stopped smiling. Completely. Elias did not react immediately. Not outwardly, but his eyes narrowed slightly. A recognition of something misaligned. Then he spoke. Wrong. Building, he said calmly. The lead operator didn't move. No, he replied. We checked the roster. Ward, Elias. Former 75th attachment. You're the only one in this facility with field trauma. Designation we can't replace. The room shifted, not physically but emotionally. Like oxygen had changed density. Elias finally looked away from the hallway and back into the room at the wounded. Prisoner. At the officers. At Claire. At the chaos waiting just outside. The trauma bay doors. Then he said quietly, This is not extraction protocol. A pause. Then, this is containment failure response. Outside, something heavy struck the rooftop above them once, then again, and far overhead. The sound of helicopter rotors began descending toward the hospital roof. The helicopter noise grew heavier overhead, pressing down on the hospital like a physical weight, not loud enough to drown everything out, just loud enough to remind everyone it was there. Inside the trauma bay, nobody spoke for a moment after Elias's last words. Containment failure response. The phrase didn't belong in a hospital. That was what made it real. The tactical operator stayed near the doorway, watching Elias carefully now, as if recalibrating his entire assessment of the room. "Ranger Medic Ward," he said again, quieter this time. "We don't have time to argue." "Classification." Elias didn't respond. His attention was elsewhere. Down the corridor, past the trauma bay, where the sound of movement was growing more controlled, closer. Claire stepped half a step toward him. "Elias, what is happening?" He didn't look at her immediately. "When systems fail in sequence," he said finally, "it's never random." That wasn't an answer, but it was all he offered. The prisoner on the trauma bed exhaled slowly, almost amused. "They're not here for me anymore," he said. One of the officers snapped. "Shut him up!" Elias lifted a hand slightly, not commanding, just stopping it. "No," he said again. The officer hesitated, for reasons he didn't fully understand. Outside the trauma room, the hallway lights shifted into emergency red. The pattern of footsteps changed. No longer rushing. Now, coordinated spacing between steps became consistent, measured, clearing methodical zones. Elias moved first, not toward the exit, toward the supply cart. He pulled out a trauma shears pack, then a sealed IV kit, then a compact airway bag. Not random selection, essential only. Claire watched him. "You're packing like we're evacuating." "We are," he said. "Where?" He paused. Then, through service corridors, the tactical operator frowned. "Those routes are partially compromised." "I know," Elias replied. That was the end of the discussion, because he already understood the building better than anyone asking questions. Distant crash echoed through the east. Wing something structural, a door forced open. Then, radio silence again, complete this time, even. The tactical team checked their comms, instinctively. "Nothing," the operator muttered. "They're jamming internal channels." Elias nodded once. "Yes." Claire's voice tightened. "Who are they?" Elias finally looked at her. Not cold, not dismissive, just precise. "Professionals," he said. That word landed heavier than anything else. A second tactical operator entered the trauma bay briefly, speaking low into his mic. 2 corridors secured. Contact minimal. Resistance is organized but controlled. Controlled, that. Word mattered more than violence, because it meant intent. Elias stepped toward the hallway. The prisoner watched him now without smiling. "You're going to move them," he said. Elias didn't respond, but he didn't deny it either. The prisoner tilted his head. "Slightly. You always move civilians. First," he added. Elias stopped, just for a moment. Then, continued walking. Down the hallway between Trauma Room 3 and the main ER, Claire followed, without fully realizing she had started. Moving. So did 2 nurses and the tactical operator, after a brief hesitation. The hallway beyond the trauma bay was darker now. Emergency lighting flickered in uneven intervals. Every few meters, a monitor beeped out of sync with the others. Elias walked at a steady pace, not fast, not cautious, Control-D. Stopped at the intersection near pediatric. Overflow. Looked left, then right, then spoke. Quietly. "West corridor is clear." "For 90 seconds, he said. The tactical operator frowned. "How do you know that?" Elias didn't answer directly. Instead, he stepped into the corridor and crouched near a supply cabinet. He touched the floor lightly, then stood. "Foot traffic pattern," he said. "They're rotating teams, not holding static positions. That means they're moving toward a central objective." Claire swallowed. "Which is what?" Elias looked down the hallway. "Us," he said. A distant metallic clatter echoed from the far end of the building, closer than before, the sound of doors being breached in sequence. One by one, the tactical operator keyed, his mic again out of habit, even though it was still dead, then lowered it. "They're clearing the hospital like a grid," he said. Elias nodded. "Once, yes." Another pause. Then Elias pointed slightly. "Ahead. Service corridor access is there," he said. "We move patients first. Staff second. Weapons only if contact is unavoidable." No one argued. Not because they agreed, but because the structure of his thinking made resistance feel inefficient. Claire stared at him. How do you know this layout so well? Elias didn't look back. I've worked in worse buildings, he said. That was all. They began moving, not as a group yet, not organized, but following him anyway, through the hallway between wards where the hospital stopped feeling like a place of care and started feeling like terrain. Behind them, somewhere deeper in the ER, a door finally gave way under pressure, and the breach continued forward. The hospital's structure vibrated again, this time not from gunfire, but from something heavier settling. Above it, a controlled descent, helicopter. Rotors now directly overhead, the sound was no longer distant. It pressed into the walls, into the glass, into the rhythm of breathing inside the corridors. Elias stopped at the junction near the service corridor entrance. He raised a hand, slightly. The group behind him halted immediately. Claire, 2 nurses, a junior resident, and the tactical operator who had stopped questioning him out loud, not because he trusted Elias, but because nothing else was working. The radio system remained dead, internal comms silent even. Security alarms had become inconsistent, some active, others frozen mid-cycle. The hospital no longer behaved like a system. It behaved like a compromised structure. The tactical operator spoke quietly. We've got rooftop insertion preparing. I just received a hard line burst relay. External command is on. Sight? Elias didn't respond. He was listening. Not to them, to the building. Footsteps above them shifted, not random, organized. Then came the sound of something locking into place on the roof metal. Contact, secure landing gear. Claire looked up instinctively. They're landing here? Yes, the operator said. Extraction team. Elias finally spoke. No, he corrected. The operator frowned. What do you mean no? But before Elias answered, the corridor lights flickered again. This time, the pattern didn't stabilize. It shifted into a steady emergency red. Every surface now tinted the same color, like the hospital had stopped. Distinguishing between systems, Elias stepped closer to the wall map near the service corridor entrance, studied it for less than 5 seconds, then pointed. This route bypasses the west breach zone, he said, but only if the secondary fire doors are still functional. They are, Claire said quickly. I think. Elias didn't look at her. Then we move now, he said. The tactical operator raised a hand slightly. We have rooftop confirmation. They're requesting visual on a sharp metallic crack cut through the sentence, somewhere above them. Then another. Not. Gunfire impact. Something heavy being repositioned on the roof. Elias paused again, long enough that Claire noticed. What is it? She asked. He didn't answer immediately. Then, that's not extraction, he said. The operator narrowed his eyes. We confirmed Black Hawk's signature. Elias shook his head once. Black Hawk is only transport, he said. That pattern above us is not landing formation. It's overwatch positioning. Silence followed. Not disbelief this. Time concern, because the correction sounded too specific, too informed. The prisoner's voice echoed, faintly from behind them through the corridor. You should listen to him, he said. No one turned, but everyone heard it. Elias finally moved again. He led them into the service corridor. The air changed. Immediately. Cooler, less circulated, filled with the hum of backup generators and old infrastructure. This part of the hospital was older, less maintained, more vulnerable, perfect for movement, terrible for safety. They walked in a tight formation now without discussing it. Elias in front, Claire close behind. The tactical operator slightly offset, watching angles, the rest following instinctively. After 20 meters, Elias stopped again. He crouched near a junction panel, opened it, studied wiring for less than 10 seconds, then closed it. They've already mapped this section, he said. The operator stiffened. How do you know? Elias stood. Because the power reroute was modified, he said. Not by hospital staff. He pointed to a subtle change in conduit. Labeling 3 days ago, he added. That detail made the operator. Pause. 3 days was not random. That was preparation, Claire whispered. So this wasn't just tonight? Elias didn't confirm it, but he didn't deny it either. A distant boom echoed through the hospital structure. Again, closer this time. The breach was advancing through interior layers. Systematically, Elias looked toward the corridor, ahead, then spoke quietly. "We're being herded," the operator frowned. "Herded where?" Elias answered without emotion. "Toward the center wing." Claire's voice tightened. "Why would they do that?" Elias finally looked at her. Not as a nurse, not as a colleague, as someone assessing consequences. Because that's where maximum containment is. "Achieved," he said, a pause, then he added, "and where extraction becomes irrelevant." A silence followed that no one interrupted, because now the logic was becoming visible, not in pieces, but as a shape. Above them, the helicopter noise shifted again, closer, lower. Then, a voice came over a suddenly restored external speaker system somewhere in the hospital. Ceiling, not internal, not broken, controlled. St. Mercy Regional Hospital, it said calmly. "This is Federal Containment Directive. All personnel remain in secured zones. Do not interfere with rooftop operations." Elias stopped walking. So did everyone else, because that voice did not match evacuation protocol. It matched command structure. Claire whispered. "Containment Directive?" Elias didn't move. His eyes narrowed slightly. Then he said quietly, "They're not here to extract anyone." He looked upward, through concrete, through steel, through the building above them. "They're here to isolate this entire facility." And for the first time that night, the hospital felt less like a place under attack, and more like a sealed perimeter being finalized. The service corridor lights flickered harder now, as if the building itself was struggling to maintain awareness. Somewhere deeper in the hospital, a metal door slammed shut, then another, locking down sections one by one, not for protection, for division. Elias slowed his pace slightly as they reached a junction where the corridor split into 3 directions. He stopped without hesitation, eyes scanning the ceiling, the floor, the wall edges, mapping pressure points that no one else seemed to notice. Behind him, Claire's breathing was uneven now. The tactical operator kept his weapon lowered but ready, eyes constantly shifting. "We're losing time," he said. Elias didn't respond immediately. Instead, he stepped closer to a fire exit panel and placed 2 fingers against it. Listened, not metaphorically, physically. Claire frowned. "What are you doing?" "Checking pressure balance," he said. "That's not possible in a hospital?" Elias finished quietly. "It is when doors are being sealed in sequence." He removed his hand, then pointed left. "This route is still breathing," he said. "The others are already locked." The operator tightened his grip on his weapon. "We don't have confirmation of that." Elias finally looked at him, not challenging, not emotional, just direct. "You don't have confirmation of anything," he said. "You're reacting." The statement landed harder than intended, because it was accurate. Distant metallic echo rolled through the corridor, again closer, now unmistakably inside the same structural block. Someone was clearing rooms, methodically, door by door, section by section. Claire spoke quietly. "Where are we even going?" Elias hesitated for a fraction of a second. Then, "Pediatric overflow ward," he said. The operator frowned. "That's not an evacuation point." "It is now," Elias replied. They moved again, faster this time, but still controlled. No running, no panic, just efficiency under pressure. As they approached the pediatric corridor, the sound of movement behind them shifted. Footsteps, not chaotic, not chasing, following, maintaining, distance. Elias stopped once more at the corner before entering the corridor. He raised a hand. Everyone froze. A long silence followed. Then a voice came from behind them, calm, measured. "Dr. Ward." The prisoner called from far back in the system of corridors. Voice carried faintly through distant hall acoustics. "You're taking them the right way, Elias." Did not turn. Claire looked back instinctively. The tactical operator raised his weapon. Slightly, Elias spoke without moving. "Do not acknowledge him," Claire whispered. "Why is he still talking?" "Because he's not confused." Elias said, "That was all." Then he stepped into the pediatric corridor. The atmosphere changed, immediately. Quieter, dimmer, smaller. Walls, decorated with outdated murals and faded cartoons that now looked out of place under emergency lighting, too innocent for what was happening around them. A child's stuffed toy lay, abandoned near a wheelchair. No one stopped for it. They couldn't. Elias moved down the corridor slowly, then stopped halfway, his head tilted slightly. Claire noticed immediately. "What is it?" Elias didn't answer at first. He looked at the ceiling vents, then the floor tiles, then the door spacing. Finally, "They're pacing this corridor," he said. The operator frowned. "What does that mean?" "Movement calibration," Elias replied. "They've already passed through here once." Claire's voice tightened. "So we're walking into them?" Elias shook his head once. "No," he said. "We're walking where they expected us to go." That silence that followed was different, heavier, because it implied intention, not chance. The tactical operator stepped closer. "Then we change route." Elias shook his head again. "No alternatives left," he said. A pause. Then he added quietly, "This is the last uncontested corridor before the center wing." The operator stared at him. "And after that?" Elias didn't answer immediately. "Then, engagement zone." A distant sound echoed through the corridor, a single sharp impact, followed by a door unlocking somewhere ahead. Claire stepped back, instinctively. "They're here," she whispered. Elias finally looked at her, not with reassurance, not with fear, with calm clarity. "They will not rush," he said. "They will clear space." The tactical operator shifted his stance. "We can hold here." Elias shook his head. "That's not what they want," he said. Another pause. Then he looked at Claire, and his voice softened slightly, not emotionally, but in weight. "Stay behind me," he said. She hesitated. "Elias!" He interrupted gently. "No unnecessary exposure," he added. "Follow instructions exactly." The operator looked at him sharply. "You're giving commands now?" Elias met his gaze. "Yes," he said simply. "No escalation, no aggression, just truth." The corridor lights flickered again, then stabilized, and in that stability came silence, too complete. Elias exhaled once, not nervous, not uncertain, prepared. Then he stepped forward, and the cost of restraint began to take shape in the narrow corridor ahead, where control would matter more than force, and every decision would leave something behind that could not be recovered. The silence in the pediatric corridor did not feel empty. It felt arranged, like something had been removed on purpose so that sound would travel differently. Elias stopped at the midpoint again. This time, he didn't signal immediately. He was listening, not for footsteps, for spacing. Claire stood just behind him now, trying not to breathe too loudly. The tactical operator held position near the wall, scanning the corridor intersections with controlled tension. At the far end of the hallway, the emergency exit sign flickered once, then stabilized. Elias spoke quietly. "They're staged," he said. The operator frowned. "Where?" "2 points," Elias replied. "Forward choke point. And rear containment line," that word again. "Containment, not pursuit, not rescue." "Containment," Claire whispered. "So we're trapped?" Elias didn't answer immediately, because trapped was emotional language. This was structural. He stepped slightly forward, eyes tracking the geometry of the corridor. "No," he said finally. "We are being guided into a controlled intersection." A distant sound echoed from ahead, metal on tile, then stillness, the kind of stillness that followed positioning, not absence. The prisoner's voice came again over the distant corridor system, carried through broken acoustics. "You always choose the civilians first," he said. Elias didn't respond, but his jaw tightened slightly. Claire noticed. "Why does he keep saying that?" Elias answered without looking. "Back. Because he's observing pattern behavior." Another silence followed. Then the tactical operator spoke. "We have movement front left," Elias raised a hand slightly. Everyone froze again. This time, longer. The pediatric corridor felt narrower now. Not physically, but psychologically, like pressure was building at both ends. Elias stepped forward alone, 2 meters. Then, stopped at the intersection where the corridor split toward the center wing. He crouched, studied the floor, then the wall seam, then the doorframe alignment. Claire watched him carefully. "What are you looking for?" Elias spoke quietly. "Anchor point," the operator frowned. "For what?" Elias didn't answer immediately. Then, for stabilization. A faint sound echoed from the left corridor. Not footsteps, a soft metallic click like equipment being adjusted. Elias stood. Immediately. "Contact is imminent," he said. Operator raised his weapon fully now. Claire stepped back instinctively. Elias moved slightly ahead of them again, positioning himself between the group and the intersection, not shielding, structuring. Then, he spoke in a low, controlled voice. "No sudden movement," he said. "They will test reaction first," Claire whispered. "Test?" Elias nodded once. "Yes," he said. "They want confirmation of command. Hierarchy." Another pause. Then the first figure appeared. Not rushing, not aggressive. A silhouette at the edge of the left. Corridor tactical gear, no visible. Insignia weapon lowered but ready. Behind him. Another, then another. Spacing consistent, not chaotic. Entry clearing formation. The lead figure stopped at the intersection and looked directly at Elias. There was no surprise in his posture, only confirmation. Elias didn't move. The operator tightened his grip. "We are Federal Extraction. Identify yourself." The lead figure ignored him. His attention stayed on Elias. Then he spoke quietly. "Ranger Medic Ward," he said. "Command confirmed your presence inside containment. Radius." Claire's breathing hitched slightly. The operator glanced at Elias sharply. Elias finally spoke. "This is not containment radius," he said. Calmly. The lead figure tilted his head slightly. "It is now," he replied. A long silence followed. Then, Elias stepped forward one half step, not aggressive, not submissive, controlled. "You are clearing a hospital," Elias said. "Not a combat zone." The lead figure didn't respond immediately. Then, "It has been reclassified." That sentence changed the atmosphere instantly, because it meant decision had already been made above them. Elias looked past the lead figure. Down the corridor behind him. More movement, more spacing, more controlled entry. The system was expanding, not reacting, executing, Claire whispered. "Elias!" But he didn't look at her. His attention was fully forward now. Measured, calculating, then. He spoke quietly. "Patients are still inside," he said. The lead figure nodded. "Once, secondary priority," he replied. A pause. Then Elias said something softer, but heavier, not acceptable. Silence followed. The tactical operator shifted slightly behind him. "Ward, what are you doing?" Elias didn't answer. Immediately. Then he reached into the trauma pouch at his side, slowly. Not threatening, just deliberate. He pulled out a folded hospital evacuation map and placed it on the floor, between both sides. Everyone watched. Elias pointed once. "To your left is pediatric overflow," he said. 6 patients, non-ambulatory. Then he shifted his finger slightly. "To your right is surgical recovery corridor. 11 patients still under sedation." A pause. Then, "You are clearing through both." The lead figure didn't deny it. That was enough. Claire's voice broke slightly. "They didn't tell us that." Elias looked at her briefly. "They never do," he said. The corridor felt colder now, not from air, from understanding. The tactical operator lowered his weapon slightly, not in surrender, but recalibration. "What's your recommendation?" he asked Elias quietly. Elias didn't answer immediately, because recommendations assume authority. This was beyond that. Finally, he spoke. "We create separation," he said. A pause. Then, "And we keep them from reaching the center wing." The lead figure heard him clearly, and for the first time, his posture shifted slightly. Not hostile, alert. Because Elias was no longer just observed, he was deciding structure inside their operation, and that was no longer expected behavior. Elias stepped forward. Again. just enough to align himself with the intersection. Between both corridors, between both forces, between containment and survival, and in a voice calm enough to feel almost unreal, he said, "If you continue this path, you will breach active patient zones." A pause. Then, "And I will not allow that." The corridor went completely still, not because of threat, but because of what had just been declared, not as a soldier, not as a nurse, but as the one person in the building who was still prioritizing human life over operational logic. And for the first time since the lockdown began, both sides understood they were no longer moving unchallenged. The stalemate in the pediatric intersection did not break. It shifted. Slowly, like pressure redistributing through a sealed system. The lead federal operator didn't raise his weapon. Neither did Elias, but the space between them had already changed. No longer corridor, no longer transit point, a decision point. Behind Elias, Claire stood rigid, her eyes moving between the figures in tactical gear and the dim corridor where patients still lay unconscious behind thin walls. The tactical operator beside Elias spoke quietly. "Ward, we can't hold both sides indefinitely." Elias didn't look at him. "I know," he said. The federal lead finally spoke again, voice lower now. "Command is ordering full corridor clearance towards center wing. That includes both adjacent patient zones." Elias responded immediately. "No, no." Emphasis, no escalation, just refusal. The word hung in the corridor like something physical. Second federal operator stepped forward slightly. "You are obstructing federal containment directive." Elias met his gaze. "Then adjust the directive," he said. Silence followed, not because of defiance, because of precision. Claire's voice came out, quieter than she intended. "Elias, they won't stop." "I know," he repeated. The difference this time was acceptance, not fear, not hesitation, understanding scale. Above them, the helicopter rotor sound began to fade slightly, shifting position on the rooftop. The operation was stabilizing into full control posture. That meant time was narrowing. Elias turned slightly toward Claire. His voice softened, but only in tone, not intent. "Move the pediatric patients now," he said. Claire blinked. "Where?" "Lower diagnostic wing," he replied. "It's structurally behind two sealed points. They haven't mapped it yet," the tactical operator frowned. "That area has no clearance." "Protocols." Elias looked at him. "It does." "Now," he said. There was no argument after that. Not because it was agreed upon, because it was the only functioning option left. Claire moved immediately with two. Nurses, careful, quiet, trying. Not to wake patients already under sedation, Elias stayed at the intersection, still between lines. Still. Holding structure. The federal lead watched. Him. Then said something different. Not tactical. Not procedural, observational. "You are not behaving like someone." "Improvising," he said. Elias didn't respond. The lead continued. "You've done corridor isolation before. Pause then, not in a hospital. That was not a question." Elias finally answered. "I've done it where people don't get second chances," he said. The lead operator studied him for a moment, longer, then stepped back slightly. Not retreat, reassessment. Behind them, movement began again, controlled teams repositioning, adjusting flow toward the center wing, but now it was slower, less certain, because the structure had resistance, not armed. Resistance, ethical resistance, and the changed operational clarity. A distant announcement crackled through a restored overhead system. "This is Federal Containment Command. Final clearance phase in progress. Non-compliant zones will be sealed." Elias looked up slightly, not surprised, just acknowledging inevitability. Claire returned after moving the first group of patients. Her hands were shaking slightly now. They said sealed. "Zones," she whispered. Elias nodded. "Yes," the tactical operator stepped closer. "Ward, what happens if they seal this wing?" Elias didn't answer immediately, because he already knew the answer was not tactical, it was medical. Then he said quietly, "Then patients inside won't be evacuated." Pause. "And movement stops being reversible." Silence followed. Heavy, real. Claire looked at him. "You're not going to let that..." happen? It wasn't a question. Elias met her eyes. No, he said. The simplicity of it made the corridor feel smaller. Above them, the helicopter sound shifted again. Now, steady, hover stabilized. The operation above had reached final. Positioning. Whatever was coming next was no longer preparation. It was execution phase. Elias exhaled. Once, then spoke quietly, everyone. Stay behind structural cover when movement resumes, he said. The tactical operator nodded slightly. This time, he didn't argue, because something had changed in his understanding too. Elias wasn't resisting authority. He was correcting direction. A distant mechanical sound echoed from the center wing. Doors. Locking, sequential final, Claire whispered. They're sealing it! Elias nodded. Yes, he said, then added, almost to himself. Before sunrise. A pause. The corridor lights flickered one last time, then stabilized into steady emergency red. And somewhere beyond the sealed hospital structure, night began to thin, not yet dawn, but close enough to change what survival would mean. The hospital did not feel like a place that had survived a crisis. It felt like a structure that had been measured, contained, and finalized. Emergency red lighting still lined the corridors, but the movement had changed. No more coordinated clearing teams, no more rapid breaches, only controlled security presence at fixed points. Like the building had been assigned boundaries it was no longer allowed to cross. Dawn was still outside the windows, not fully arrived, just a pale pressure behind the storm clouds. Inside the pediatric wing, the patients had been quietly relocated hours earlier. No alarms, no announcements, only Elias's instructions, followed because there had been no better alternative. Claire stood near the wall now, exhaustion settling into her posture. The tactical operator was speaking softly with federal personnel near the corridor entrance, their tone no longer urgent, replaced by procedural. Calm, everything was shifting into aftermath, protocol. But Elias did not move with it. He remained near the intersection, the same place where structure had been decided. Instead of chaos, a federal command. Officer approached him slowly, not with urgency, with recognition. Ward, the officer said. Elias looked at him. Command wants debrief informal. Acknowledgement of field intervention. Elias didn't respond. Immediately, around them, other staff moved carefully, nurses checking patients, residents speaking in low voices, security documenting structural breaches. The hospital was still functioning, but differently now, like something had been removed and not replaced, the officer continued. You are being listed as primary stabilization asset during containment. Event, a pause, then also confirmed. Ranger medical designation. Active service record reviewed. Claire looked up slightly at that, so did others nearby, but Elias didn't react, not outwardly, not even slightly. The officer gestured toward a small group near the corridor. Entrance, hospital leadership, federal observers, and military personnel gathered in restrained discussion. They would like to formally acknowledge your actions, he said. Elias finally spoke. No. The officer blinked once. It's standard procedure. Elias shook his head slightly. I didn't perform procedure, he said. Pause. I maintained patience. Silence. Followed. Not disagreement, just recalibration of language. Claire stepped forward slightly. Elias, they're trying to... He raised a hand gently, not stopping her, just asking for quiet. The officer studied him more carefully now. You understand what you prevented, he said. Elias nodded once. Yes, that was all. No elaboration, no reflection. Nearby, a federal medic placed a sealed container on a cart, evidence tagging completed, paperwork already in motion. The operation was moving forward without needing emotional context, but the hospital staff still watched. Elias. Because they understood something was unresolved in how he stood there. Not pride, not relief, absence of either. Claire approached him slowly once the officer stepped away. You could have told them, she said quietly. Who you are? Elias didn't look at her. I did, he said. No, she replied. Not really. That made him pause, just slightly. Outside the nearest window, the sky had shifted again. Lighter now. Rain thinning. the city beginning to reappear through the glass. Elias watched it for a moment, then spoke. "Identity doesn't change outcome," he said. Claire frowned. "It changes how people see you," a long silence followed. Then Elias answered. "People seeing me is not the priority. That was final." No argument survived it. A hospital. Administrator approached hesitantly. With a small object in hand, a standard gesture of gratitude in crisis aftermaths. Token. Recognition. He offered it toward Elias. Elias looked at it for a moment, then gently pushed it. "Back. Keep it," he said. The administrator hesitated. "At least sign the report?" Elias shook his head once, already turning slightly away. Claire's voice broke the silence. "Where will you go now?" Elias stopped walking, for a moment longer than usual. Then he said, "Next shift. No emotion attached, no destination defined, just continuation." He adjusted the strap of his trauma kit, now empty, cleaned, reset, ready for use elsewhere. As he walked toward the exit corridor, one of the federal operators he had spoken to earlier stepped aside, not formally, respectfully, no salute, no ceremony, just space. Outside the glass doors of St. Mercy Regional Hospital, the morning light was finally breaking through the storm-soft, quiet, unremarkable Elias paused at the threshold, looked back once, not at the leadership, group, not at the federal teams, at the hospital itself, at the place where silence had carried more weight than noise. Then he stepped forward and disappeared into the morning without being followed. Behind him, the hospital resumed its normal rhythm, slowly rebuilding what had been interrupted. But no one inside returned fully to how they had been before, because somewhere in the structure of that night, they had all learned the same thing, that the quietest person in the room is not always the least powerful. And by sunrise, the man they had tried to define was already gone.